Reports this morning that the Biden administration has warned Moscow about using a nuclear weapon. The Washington Post reports that the administration had been sending private messages for months about the grave consequences if President Vladimir Putin used nuclear weapons as he made that threat this past week. Here with me now to discuss the latest updates from Russia and Ukraine, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and Senior Fellow for Defense Priorities, Daniel Davis. Colonel Davis, welcome back to the National Desk. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Thanks for having me, Jan.
Of course. First, can you give us an update on what you're hearing as to what's happening on the ground in Ukraine?
Man, you know, there's chaos happening all over the place. You have so much more happening right now than I think in maybe any other single day since this war started in February, is that you have battles going on in 4 separate regions of Ukraine on both sides of the line. You also have these referendums that are in the middle of being started. You have also the mobilization that has now begun in Russia. There's chaos there with people heading to the borders and also people trying to figure out how the mobilization is even going to work. So there's a lot of things going on right now, a lot of moving parts, and we're going to have to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, in the meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin has already announced a draft. He's made these serious nuclear threats. Take a listen to what he had to say about that.
И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф.
So we subtitled that, but you can see it. What he said was, we will, without question, use all of the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff. Colonel Davis, you called it this past week when you wrote, the big questions right now, will Putin attempt a signature response and escalate the scale and scope of his attacks in Ukraine? How serious is Mr. Putin, and do you think he would use nuclear weapons against Ukraine? So how about it? What do you think? How serious should we take this, and how should we respond?
But we should take this very serious, because there's the one thing we need to understand. You know, lots of analysts want to talk about how things are going bad for Russia and how Ukraine just succeeded in this Kherson or a Kharkiv offensive, implying that, you know, things are going to turn around and now Russia's going to be driven out. Look, Putin is all in on this, and especially now he is demonstrating just how far he's willing to go, which means there is nothing he won't do. His political and possibly his physical life is on the line here, and he is going to do anything it takes to succeed, and he can't go back. There's no other place for him to go. And so if we push him into a corner, or if he gets into a situation to where he thinks Russia itself is at threat and at risk, I mean, they've never said anything besides that they would use nuclear weapons. Right. And I think we better take this very serious.
In the meantime, you know, you talked about all the stuff happening in Ukraine, and there's a lot going on in Russia right now as well, this mass exodus. There are protests because, you know, Putin called to draft 300 new troops. Can you tell us more about what's happening there in Russia? Could we see him close the borders to stop people from leaving?
Yeah, that certainly remains a possibility. We'll have to see how that works out. The way this is set up at this point is it's mobilizing 300 reservists. So it's not just going into the general population. This is only people who have served in the past and have some military experience. Most of them are not going to the front. A good portion of them, from what they're reporting, are going to replace other combat troops elsewhere, like in the east, that are going to be moved up, that are already combat ready. So we'll see how that plays out. But clearly, this is terrifying a great many in Russia who have been watching this special military operation from a distance, and now all of a sudden it's hitting home, and it's scaring a lot of people, especially Russian mothers, and who's to blame them for that? In
fact, we were just showing some video of just the line of cars down the highway of people trying to leave, trying to get out of Russia, especially those who don't want to be, the reservists, as you mentioned, who don't want to be called up and go to war. We know at least 6,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine so far. I know earlier you mentioned you were talking about the referendums there. Axios reporting this morning that residents in Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine began voting in those referendums. World leaders obviously calling this a sham, but it could lead to the annexation of nearly 15% of Ukraine. What do you make of this? Is this what Putin's going to do, region by region, just try to annex areas one at a time in Russian-controlled areas?
Yeah, this is almost a verbatim replay of Crimea in 2014, where they had this referendum, and then immediately thereafter the Russian Duma formally annexed it into Russian territory. And that's exactly what's going to happen right here. And I think that the primary purpose of this, there's 2 real reasons, is that Russia came under a lot of criticism when they abandoned the Kharkiv region, and all the Russian-speaking people there who had provided support for them, they felt abandoned because the Ukrainian folks came in, and now a lot of them have been jailed for being, against the state of Ukraine, and they felt abandoned. To make sure that doesn't happen anywhere else, they're doing this to make them Russian citizens, but then also to say, hey, this is now Russian territory. This is no longer occupied Ukraine. This is Russian territory, and that raises the stakes for perhaps any NATO help to attack into those areas, which they've already designated as a red line. And I think that's probably what he's trying to do, which, again, ramps up the risk for everybody.
And finally, Colonel, we are heading into the winter months. The winters in Ukraine and Russia, extremely harsh. How will the winter affect the war on both countries?
This is probably the thing I'm watching more than even battlefield activities right now. And that is what happens in the West when winter sets in. I mean, we have a big date on the calendar of December 5th when a lot of bans are supposed to go in on all the Russian oil. And that could potentially spike prices for fuel, for gas, for gasoline, for natural gas. And already some of the prices for gas in Europe are already 10 times higher than they were a year ago, which is devastating economic activity. And they're already on the cusp of a potential economic downturn. Now, if all those things conspire and the winter comes, the weather is harsh, you could see the potential for lots of the Western Europeans now saying, hey, we don't want to keep these sanctions on Russia anymore, and the support could wane for Ukraine. And I think Putin's planning on that.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis, always a pleasure to have you on and get your expertise. Thanks for joining us this morning. Hope you have a great
Always
weekend.
my pleasure, Jan. Thanks a lot.